what's happening in the ballroom and other conversations. But I don't want to lose time in this session because it's a very important conversation. So I'm going to let the panel get started, and we'll just let people filter in and come in and join us, okay? So I'm going to let Donald, our moderator, introduce himself and his panel. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. My name is Donald McAulay. I'm a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Connecticut, graduate professor, also at Quinnipiac University. And so I appreciate you being here for this courageous conversation. We've already seen throughout the conference how mental health has been a staple in many of the things we talk about in our freedoms. And so I just want to say as we begin the conversation, complete disclaimer that if you have your own triggers, this is going to be a raw conversation. And so if there's things, these clinicians will be here. I thank you to Black Enterprise and the Black Men Excel Summit actually curating the specific talent where we have individuals that make up licensed clinicians, individuals that work in the corporate space. And so as we get started on this specific topic, I'm going to start with the question and give them an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves. And we want to talk about how Black men are now championing the mental health space. But we have to have the conversation of why was this conversation taboo? And so as we start the conversation, I can start with you, Chris, introducing yourself, but why has this conversation been taboo?
Yeah, so when you look at how a clinician enters the field, it's typically because we're what we call wounded warriors or wounded healers. And speaking from my own past experiences, a child of a father who was a drug addict, a functional drug addict, a six-figure drug addict, also being a teen parent, having a child early, meeting my wife in school at 19, getting her pregnant, being abandoned by the family because we didn't follow the blueprint of you go to college, you get your degree, your job, then you have kids. We didn't do that in that particular order. And what I find is that Black men especially, we enter this field because we're trying to find our own healing. That happened with me. When I went to UNC Charlotte for undergrad and I go into a counseling office, I didn't see anybody in there that looked like me. I didn't see any man and I didn't see any Black man. And I go to my pastor and the pastor does a great job giving a prayer, but that prayer didn't provide me with any tools or insight on how to deal with my mental health. So from that journey, I realized that I had to be called into this work, and I was originally trying to find my own healing. Luckily enough, I got educated, obtained degrees and credentials to be able to help others heal.
Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Muller, the Black therapist. I'm the owner of Modified Wellness, which is a nonprofit that provides mental health services and resources to companies and organizations. And part of the reason why we don't, broach this topic a lot is because of the taboo associated with mental health. Especially for Black men, we have this, we should be strong, we shouldn't cry, all of those things that are associated with manhood. And until we define our own definition of manhood, we'll continue to not take care of ourselves. So this conversation is so important because we are pushing past that stigma and getting the help that we need. And I'm proud to be one of those leaders in the charge of talking about mental health, even my own bouts with anxiety, and that was part of what kind of catapulted me, I feel like, to the forefront, because as a therapist I acknowledge my own challenges, and that makes you real, right? You're not Superman, and I think people just need to see that and feel that in order to kind of let their guard down.
Well, I appreciate being here once again. I'm Philip Palmer with Bank of America, and I work on our global talent team. And so from a business perspective, what I do a lot of the times I spend time with our teammates and business partners in regards to helping them to understand the value of ensuring that they're taking care of their emotional and physical wellness. My viewpoint on the taboo is a little bit different because when I point back to my childhood, I came from a very stable household. I'm the son of immigrants, and so I was always taught to work hard to be the best as I can. And so I saw the taboo differently because I was always pushed to exceed and to be successful. And then I have to ask myself the question, like, what does it mean to be successful? And it hit me when I was in my mid to late 20s, when I was with a child. I'm married, and I'm walking up the stairs at my home, and I collapse, fall down the stairs, get rushed to the hospital, and the doctor tells me, Philip, if you don't change something by the time that you're 30, you'll die. And so that was my big takeaway, is that if I don't start taking care of myself and start thinking differently about my own performance, my own way that I work, it's going to have an impact on me and my family. And what has been the most interesting thing when you speak about, this idea of the taboo is that I had to make the choice for myself, because I recall when I told my uncle, hey, I'm going to have this new project, I'm going to be speaking about mental health and emotional wellness. He's like, why? Like, why would you be doing that? And so I had to, in a sense, get myself out of the comfort zone, because this is a topic that Black men just didn't speak about. It was about winning, about performance, about being as good as you can be, because you have to outperform everybody else. And that was my big takeaway, is I had to change the conversation for myself.
And I'm gonna ask this question more so for our audience, but I think we've had conversations in our private time about why Black men took the charge. As a panel, could you speak a kind of like the brief overview of like the historical space of the psychology, the mental health of Black males, so that we can understand the complexities of why Black men have decided to step up to the mantle and champion this conversation?
I would say look at George Floyd. I think for me that was a pivotal point, and there were situations way before that. But I think something about that, like really, and then the pandemic at the same time, that was like a changing point, and I started to see mental health like catapult to the next level. We had time to kind of reflect even more. We were quiet and still. You really had time to be in your own thoughts. Black men are the least likely to go and get help. Men are least likely to enter the field of mental health. So look at that combination, where there's not enough of us in the field and not enough of us going to get help. So I felt compelled, like somebody has to do something. Because there's not a lot of Black male therapists, we make up only like 2% of therapists in the field. I'm very solution focused, so I try to find a way, how do we do that? So I started Black Male Therapists, a Facebook group on Facebook. I'm like, I feel isolated. So I said, I need to create something so that I can connect with other brothers in the field. So right now we're at 800 members around the country of therapists. And we share resources and just connect and develop a relationship, which is so important. So it's not a lot of us, but there's at least 800 that we know of that are Black male therapists. But we still have a long way to go. And also encouraging other young men to get into the field, and that's important. So creating visibility. A lot of people don't know what a therapist do or what a therapist looks like, that you can maintain your swag, or you can still, you don't have to, people want to maintain the authenticity, right? And certain fields doesn't have that. But you can still be dope, you can still do whatever, and you could be in a helping profession, right? It's not just for women, because this is what coined a woman's field. Mm-hmm. So I feel like shifting that and making those changes, that men can enter this field and you can maintain your authenticity.
I would say debunking the myths that Black men don't take care of their kids. When you look across different groups, Black men are actually the highest number when it comes to men who are taking care of kids by way of involvement. And because it doesn't always look traditional, there are a lot of non-residential Black fathers that take care of their kids. And for me, that was a call to action, because being a 19-year-old flunking out of undergrad, and now I get that call, Chris, I'm pregnant. I didn't want that stereotype to be played out. And I think men across the world, when you look at hip hop culture, when you look at different areas where men are present, we're demonstrating involvement with our families, we're demonstrating involvement with our children. Black love, that's a trending topic right now. So that's us leading the charge, not just in the mental health space, but the family space, because there's a connection where when you look at 70% of women are filing for divorce, right? The divorces are filed by 70% of women. And when I look at the work that I do, the women are saying men are emotionally unavailable. Well, what does that look like? It starts with the family. It starts with the father. We obtain our esteem from the relationships we have with our fathers. So that's the charge that we're leading as men, to demonstrate that we're healers too. It's not just the role of the woman to be there to heal.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the things that has caused me to want to remain visible as an HR professional that's focusing on emotional wellness is that I did not see a lot of people that look like me. And so, especially during George Floyd, I can recall Please don't take this the wrong way, but I told my wife, man, I feel like I'm the ambassador for black people now because I'm being called into all these meetings and presentations and public events because they needed someone to look like me and to kind of speak from that perspective. And so that was a challenge for me as a professional that I'm going to challenge all of us as professionals to be thoughtful about what can you do to ensure that the message of emotional wellness and mental health is important for you and for your firms. Because if it starts with somebody, it has to start with you. And if you do it well, you can be a dynamic change for your firm if you think about it from that perspective.
I appreciate that, and I think the audience appreciate that. So I think we do a great job of talking about the criminalization of black males, the black absentee father, and also talking about how we come to the field. Those who have read the medical apartheid have recognized the plight and the fact that black males at one time did not have the emotional intelligence or the emotional intellect to figure out their own feelings, these vapid things. And so we are also seeing this reality of the reverberating effect of seeing these public lynchings that are not being dealt with, and then to talk about the idea of visibility and lack of visibility. And so as individuals unpack these specific things in your profession, can you talk specifically about the complexities of the mental health process? Like, how do we get in it? How did you get in it? And also your own personal journeys with mental health.
I think it starts with understanding that the letters do have meaning. There's so many different dimensions of mental health, and there's subsectors. So as a licensed marriage and family therapist, I take a systemic lens. And then you look at the social worker, the licensed professional counselor, the psychologist, the psychiatrist. There's so many different roles within mental health. So I got into the field based on my personal story in alignment with wanting to be a parent. But a lot of my friends that were having children young, they didn't parent through marriage. I parent through my marriage. I developed a relationship with my wife, and that took a lot of time and patience, especially being young and immature at the time. And that's really the message that I hope to progress through, because a lot of research indicates that executives and personnel who are married obtain 40% more in their income than professionals that are not married. And that's across all different sectors of business. Professionals that are married also indicate lower levels of stress and depression. And let me put the disclaimer, we're talking about happy, healthy marriages. So marriage is a gateway to positive mental health. It's a gateway to restoring and healing the black family.
For me, I would definitely say that this profession chose me, because I don't know how I wanted to actually own a car dealership. Like that was my goal. I'm like, I love cars. I'm like, I'm gonna own a car dealership, and that was my goal. But I started working at a drug treatment program, and as a counselor, I was 24 years old, ready to support and take on the world, and I had a cape on, and I realized that it takes much more than a cape to support people. And it takes listening and understanding, and I had to go back to school and get that clinical piece. So I got my master's in social work, and then I'm taking these courses. I'm realizing that, wow, there's not a lot of black men in the classroom. I was the only one. The professors knew my name the first day. They just knew because I was the only one there. I'm like, there's something wrong with this picture, and I said, from that day throughout my academic career, I was like, I really want to change the face of mental health. I really want to make an impact, especially in black families, because I know how important mental health is. And that's been my journey ever since. And I've since returned back to that school, Adelphi University, as a professor now, and hoping to also turnkey my experience and my information to up-and-coming students coming in, and from all walks of life. And I want them to understand that you don't have a cape, because there's a lot of people that don't look like us, that are coming into our communities and helping us, and they have on these capes, and we don't need to be saved, right? You need to have empathy, you need to have understanding. Those are some of the key things. You need to be aware of your own privilege and what that privilege looks like, and not try to just come in and try to just save us. And it takes much more than that. So that's been kind of my passion.
I think what's been interesting is that when you speak about not having a cape, so I work for a bank, and I'm an HR professional, and my focus has always been on developing talent, and so professional development essentially. And so what I saw is that a lot of people, specifically African-American men, felt like they had to work a lot harder to become more successful. And so I was assigned to this work because we're looking at it from a performance standpoint. How can we help people to be more effective? And I was surprised, to your point about marriage, or to your point about the mindset, how if you have a thoughtful view of emotional wellness or your mental health, it actually improves performance. And so that was my viewpoint, which is, man, if we can just do this right and we can encourage people the right way, not only could we feel better, but the bank will perform better. And so that's what really attracted me to the project, because I'm thinking about what can be something that I can give to, and so yesterday I was speaking to 500 college new grads. If I could tell them one thing to help them be successful at the firm, and that was take care of your mental health, right? And so that was my viewpoint on it, and I'm thankful that I have a company that allows me to continue to preach this topic, because it's critical for us to be successful.
Well, I'm gonna direct the next question back to you. So the article that came out of Headspace that talks about corporate spaces providing mental health services, but recognizing that their employees do not feel that they're adequately supported. Asking a specific question, and when we think about Black men in terms of we think about the workforce, what's available to them, and the contrast of, do you have the opportunity in that corporate space to exercise those privileges, to have conversations about how you exist in the space? And so how do we work through that? And also, after the panelists, other panelists, answering the specific question of, as a clinician, how do individuals operate in those spaces in terms of trying to find that kind of safety in the workspace?
So from a business standpoint, I'd encourage us all, what I say with a lot of my teammates is you have to start with yourself first. And so if I want to create an environment where people feel more comfortable taking advantage of other resources, and so at our company specifically, we offer free unlimited phone counseling. We offer additional counseling services. We offer, if someone is having a specific issue, have a specific team that helps them with these issues. And what I try to get people to understand is that you have to decide first that it's okay. And so we know that there's sponsorship and leadership from the top of the house that wants you to do these things, but the individual has to say that I personally value the importance of taking care of my own mental health and wellness. So that's number one, and I challenge all of us in the room together today that if you are a business person, as we all are, what are you doing to model the right behaviors that says that I'm not going to be the one that's going to be emailing on my vacation. I'm not the one that's going to be working in these crazy hours. On top of that, I'm going to be will tell my team, you know what, I'm taking advantage of the employee assistance program to go get additional services or counseling. So I think it's number one is many times I think that we expect something grand to happen that will say that it's okay to take advantage of these resources, but it has to start with you, and that's how you really affect change. And so as an African-American male, I like to be very public and visible about I work on this topic, and I want you all to be thinking about this for yourself as well. Curious from a clinician standpoint, what do you think about that?
I think understanding the resources is important and know how to access the resources. You mentioned EAP, Employee Assistance Programs. I'm a big advocate of pre-engagement counseling for couples. If you're not married yet and you're dating, get the counseling before engagement, because we hear premarital counseling, marriage counseling, but pre-engagement counseling is going to be more important, because when you're already engaged, you have the pressures of a wedding venue, 200-300 people that you've already sent invitations to. So if we can establish a foundation through mate selection and identifying a partner that is going to be there for you in collaboration to the values and goals and dreams you have professionally and personally, then we're keeping families together. And when you look at the media now with all the celebrities divorcing and high affluent personnel, you think about the billionaires, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, even Bob Johnson, the divorce, right? So what is it about acquiring wealth that leads these men and women to divorce later on in life? And I believe that's about the maintenance too. So you have the foundational component, and then you have the maintenance piece. Marriage is a lifestyle. Marriage isn't something you just do one time. You do it every day. And accessing your EAP services to just get a check-in. If you and your partner don't have problems, that doesn't mean you don't need counseling. You could just go just for an oil check like you do with your car. You do a maintenance check with your marriage. And that looks like utilizing services that are already part of your benefit package.
Yeah. So I'll go on the other spectrum that there is a mistrust with EAP because it's association with the employer. So if you're dealing with microaggressions from your supervisor, if you just just don't like being there, but it's like I have to work and get paid. So you're less likely to want to utilize that service. So I think we need to create kind of understanding that they're not associated with each other, that it's confidential, that your information would not be spread to your supervisor, so there's no kind of repercussions for that, retaliation, so to speak. So I think that's firmly one of the biggest things that people are like, I don't want to go to AP because that's with my job. My issue is with the job. Like a lot of people come to sessions and really just processing issues with work, with the supervisor, not feeling that they are paid what their worth is, just so much work and piling on work and not being able to do the things that they want to do. And secondly, I feel like companies really reinforcing and encouraging wellness, right? Not the fake one where they have signs in the lunchroom where it's like we support somebody, laying on the beach, but really actually reinforcing it. That from the supervisor on, up, even the maintenance person, everybody knows that this place encourages wellness, whether that means Friday, leave early, little fringe benefits that people enjoy. It's not always about the money. It's where you feel supported, where you feel heard. Oh, is your birthday? You can leave an hour. Or little things like that does well for someone's mental health, right? So it's really important that you just don't say we do DEI and we do all the inclusion stuff, but still fake with it. It's important that you actually have a place of wellness, create a culture of wellness, and that's something that I do. I provide workshops to companies on creating a culture of wellness and then it's important if it's a African-American company that someone there's a trained clinician that looks like them is coming in and having that conversation. That relatability again is super important. So those are some of the tools that companies should be using to create wellness, not fake wellness, but actually real wellness, and you actually see the productivity increase in your work performance of your employees, and less retention and less call out.
So I want to ask this question, and then I think you please answer this respectfully to the place that you work in your professional space. When we think about black males and we see the stereotypical images, we have these ideas of them not being human and also needing to be superhuman. And so how they exist in the space, corporate spaces, we've heard speakers have conversations about being six-figure men and walking into establishments that are predominantly white and feeling like you are still the servant. And when your money and success can be easily snatched away. Or we think about relationships in terms of the toxic masculinity. You are the problem why this is not working. And then lastly, we think about how do we raise our boys to actually have these specific emotions with themselves or in educational spaces where they become the deviant person. So I think the question is really about, in the mental health space, how do you operate when you have to be these two people in a space that doesn't really want you?
I think that's very challenging. I heard, I went to dinner last night, and a gentleman said that, being a CEO and at the top, he said it's very isolating. You feel like you're by yourself, or you're in these corporate spaces. You may be the only one in the room. Where do I fit in? You want to maintain your authenticity, but can you? You have to be mindful of your language. How do I sound? Like, do I fit in? I'm wondering what they're thinking about me. All of these things, right? So you've achieved this level of success, but you're still questioning yourself. And what does that do to your mental health? It's not when you questioning, and that's when imposter syndrome. There's a lot of conversations around imposter syndrome in black men. Do I feel deserving? Do I feel like I need to be here? Do I deserve it? Maybe this is fake. What is all of this? Did I really study well? Did I really pass my test? Like, you start to question all of these things in terms of like, how did I get here? You know what I'm saying? So that's not, when you start to question those things, it really starts to bring down your self-esteem. And then on top of how society views us as black men already. So you're struggling with whether you're climbing up the ladder, you have the Benz and the Rolex, but if you get pulled over, that don't mean anything. If you have a doctorate, you're a CEO of a company, that doesn't mean anything, right? Because of what society has deemed us to look at, that we look like just monsters, right? So how do you navigate these kind of different, spectrums of feelings? So no wonder why, black men, we're dealing with stuff. And then who are we going to tell? Who are we going to talk about this to? Not to our homeboy at the barbershop.
So to pick up on that last statement you just made, Aaron, in the space I'm in working with high performance couples, they're taught how to be selfish to get to the top. There's room for selfishness. When you're working on a degree program or you're trying to get up the corporate ladder. But once you find a mate you want to marry, the transition becomes, how do we turn I into we? And being able to work to shed some of that selfishness off so you can have that other person, like you just mentioned, Aaron, that you can go and confide in. That's intimacy. Intimacy isn't just physical. Having that emotional, intimate connection. You'll hear the phrase, behind every good man, you have a good woman. Behind every good woman, you should have a good man. And if we can pull couples together in the corporate space and make sure that women in particular, and I use that as an example because I asked the question during one of the sessions that got an uproar, what happens when a man is so vulnerable that it blinds the woman? If a woman says to a man they want them to be vulnerable, but then those tears come down, how do we prepare for that backlash of that now being unsafe because they said they want it, but we give it to them and now it's like, what do I do with it? And that's why you can get a coach, a therapist to help you regulate that emotional space, because the relationship is the shared union between the two people. And that can create a bond, right? When we bond our brothers and sisters, then we can go into the workforce with that armor because we know when we come home, it's a safe space.
So this is a very thought-provoking question and conversation, and something that I think we all can agree with is that there's a uniqueness to our journey, right? So I work with executive development. I support executive development, and I was in a meeting this week with 25 other Black executives, and we were discussing, what does it mean for us to grow? Like, how do we become more effective? And there are things that the research tells leaders to do. So for example, have a certain amount of aggression, or the research will say a certain amount of confidence how you communicate. That when we do it, as the African-American male, I have been called the angry Black guy more than once. And if you knew me, you'd realize that's ridiculous. But for some reason, that's what they called me. I've heard some women tell me that they've been called the other word, right? That isn't too positive. And so what's interesting is, what I ask people to consider is, first and foremost, is what's your mindset going into it? Because I find that mindset is a differentiator for success. And I have to decide, what do I want out of my career, out of my life, whatever the case may be. I also ask people to look at every aspect of their life, their personal life, their marriage, their spiritual life, is that in balance? Like your physical conditions, everything has to be working for you. And the last thing I'd ask us to consider is, to the point that was made around, how do we then kind of wear the two hats? So I'd encourage us to consider the value of bringing your whole self to work, right? And so not being ashamed of who we are, stepping into it with power. And if someone's going to call me aggressive, that's great, I'm still going to win. You know, so that type of thinking, the changing a mindset where I'm no longer viewing myself as a victim, but as a conqueror, that might not be good language use. Forgive me, clinicians. So I think that you have to decide for yourself first. And then it also allows you to be vulnerable in the right way. Because if I know that I'm already thinking about winning, I could then talk to my spouse, my therapist, my coach to help me to help me to get that support. And so I like to share with a lot of our teammates that if you don't have a therapist, find one. If you don't have an executive coach, find one. Then also, as a parent, I have 3 boys myself. I'm trying to challenge my kids to not see themselves through the prism of being what society thinks you are, but in the prism of who we know you are. So you're not someone that's aggressive or loud or angry. You are a smart, talented boy that's going to be successful. So I give them that, and that's what their foundation is, and then they grow from that. And so that's kind of my viewpoint on how we kind of plant the seed for young men, so that way they're not going through the same challenge that we went through, always second-guessing ourselves.
So I think we've got to a point of recognizing that the mental health conversation is about trauma, it's about self-perception, dispositionalities in the space. And I'm gonna ask this question specifically to our clinicians. Many folks realize that their mental health is because of specific traumas, but for some, and as individuals write about it, or we've seen it in TV, sexual violence against men, early sexual violence, and having that specific conversation. How do you approach, or how would you advise individuals approach those conversations when they have experienced sexual violence and they don't realize that they can be a victim?
Well, I feel like one is them feeling safe to do it, right? And finding the safe space to have that conversation, one connecting it, because you need to actually recall, because for some it may be so repressed that they don't even, or suppressed that they don't even realize it. So one thing is first identifying that, or remembering that you had that experience, and then there's a lot of shame and guilt with that. And maybe they may have blame that maybe they did something wrong, and it's very difficult to come to have that conversation. But understanding how important it is for your well-being, and finding whether it be a trained therapist to talk to about it, to start to unpack that, and just knowing that there's confidentiality in going to a therapist, right? So there's this shame, I don't want nobody to know. Just knowing that there is a safe space for you to process that, and that there is it's not your fault. I think that's the biggest thing, because there's a lot of blame. Like, what did I do for that to happen?
Mm-hmm. So I've recently had a client that came to me and said, Chris, I need your help because I don't know why I can't sustain long-term relationships with women. And from the first session, I do what we call a genogram. It's just a fancy way of saying a family map, a family tree. And what I realized is that as we looked at 3 generations, all the men before him had experienced sexual trauma, but it was not talked about until later on in their lifetime. And then as he saw these dots connect, he began to burst out in tears, and he acknowledged he was also a victim of sexual trauma. We also noticed through the genogram, all these men in his family had multiple children by multiple women. They too weren't able to sustain long-term relationships. So what I find is that we have to go back to our family of origin and acknowledge and identify the debts and ledgers that are being pushed down from generation to generation. And that's what therapy helps individuals do, in a safe space, a safe environment. And to another point we made earlier about the safety of therapy, being knowledgeable around what third-party pay looks like. Without a diagnosis, you can't use third-party pay. So in the clinic that I work in, we take self-pay to protect clients so information is not reported. And, you know, Bob Johnson talked about everything being political in the sense of the government running it. Well, we got to make sure that we're performing due diligence around the client's safety when it comes to medical records, and ensuring that if an executive shares his personal trauma about sexual abuse, it's not going to be something that can come out. And I believe once we begin to open up more, then we can start to heal up.
I'm asking a separate, different question to Philip. How do black men avoid their Will Smith moment?
That's a great question.
Good question.
Well, without wanting to comment on the specific situation, what I think we're referring to is that, you know, many times, and I see this professionally, where you work hard to get a black candidate in front of a senior leader or a management team member, and they may have like one meeting or one call, and then like that thing doesn't go that well, or there might be an emotional reaction to something that has happened that might cause an overreaction in regards to what's going on. And so what I would ask us to be thoughtful about is, and this might sound like very HR-ish, but please forgive me, is that y'all got to be strategic. Like, everything that you're doing has to be strategic. And so when you're thinking about, if I'm going into a meeting, if I have a pitch, I have a presentation, what's my plan all the way through? And also, as part of that preparation, I'm also thinking about mental health as well, right? Because, not commenting on Mr. Smith, but you could argue that perhaps he brought something with him to that event that caused him to have the reaction that he had. And so what's interesting to me is that sometimes, so I do a lot of work with executives on public speaking, is that a question that might seem innocent to me turns into a bigger deal to that person because they haven't dealt with something in the past, right? And so I'd encourage us to be very strategic about what's the baggage that we're carrying that might cause us to have an irresponsible reaction when something like that pops up. And I always encourage my teammates that, there's little things you can do to practice it to kind of challenge your mindset. And so you don't have to make big wholesale changes to how you approach your job, but there's small steps that you can take to begin to tweak how you respond and react to things.
Thank you. I think at this time, I think we have 15 minutes left, or maybe have a little bit more time, but we want to give the audience an opportunity to ask whatever questions you think are pertinent, or that let the panel kind of answer your questions, but we can.
How you doing? Philip, you kind of opened the door to the question that I was going to ask. And Chris, you talked about a little bit in the beginning of marriage is a great catalyst to build happiness and whatnot. But a lot of times we come to a marriage, two broken people trying to become whole. And for black people, black men specifically, and speaking on my journey, a lot of times we are broken and we don't realize we're broken. We were either raised by broken parents or the lack thereof, and all of these different things, but it's not until you start your journey that you start to realize these things. And you touched on it a little bit, Philip, but what are things that we can proactively do to start thinking about this and having a conversation? Because a lot of times we go through life ignorant to the fact that we are broken. Mm-hmm. So what are those things that we can change the narrative in our community?
Great question. Rooms like this help that process start, because we're now debunking the stigma around mental health, around getting services before you need them. And, I always tell couples, 2 negatives don't make a positive. So if you bring your drama and she's bringing her drama and neither of you processed it, you just got more drama. So self-love, starting with the ability to understand what you need to clean up, allow yourself to be that first template for love, and then you'll be healthy enough to not only establish a relationship, but assess and identify men and women that aren't at your stature and don't have the capacity you do to have a healthy relationship. And you can stand clear of those people.
Yeah, the other thing that we like is along those lines is we work with Thrive Global, that's Ariana Huffington's firm, and they spend a lot of time with us telling us that it's about self-compassion as well. And so we ask people to be very thoughtful and intentional about having self-compassion first. And then to bring to awareness, we call it in the HR space like a limiting paradigm. Like, so do you know what's that thing that's limiting you from a mentality standpoint? For me, it was, I had a mindset that no matter what I do, I could always do it better, which I thought that motivated me. But at the end of the day, that turns into an anchor that limited my performance, how I dealt with my wife, how I dealt with my children. Because imagine like I have a kid that comes home from school with like straight A's, and they're like, Dad, I got straight A's. That's a 97, man. I could have been higher. You know what I'm saying? And so that type of pressure, that creates the next generation of broken people. Mm-hmm. And so we need to deal with that first. Like, what's that limiting paradigm in my mind that allows me to challenge that feeling of brokenness?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Carson Bird. I just wanted to say thank you for everybody on the panel, but I also want to give a huge shout out to Black Men Excel and Black Enterprise. I was talking to my brother here 5 years ago. I disclosed my mental health, all of those things, questions that you just posed, was at the top of my game. I mean, had everything, and struggled because everything that I had worked hard for, I felt like in a spiritual lens that I guess the enemy took it away from me. I was at the top of my game, and now you come knocking. My question, or maybe a growth opportunity, is we talk about therapy, but I've not heard about psychiatry. I went to therapy, and I grew up in therapy. My journey started at 5 years old with some things, and I had no problem to ever go ask for help. But growing up, I was on medication. I was on Prozac. They developed childhood Prozac for me and a white kid in California, so I excelled. Nobody knew. Got to college, stopped taking medicine, went through this whole identity of I don't want to be dependent on anything, so I tried it on my own. Got to about 28, and the pressures of life, professionally, personally, do I get married, family issues, and I went to therapy and realized that I needed a psychiatrist to help me balance my levels till I could get to a place to actually unpack and heal. So I don't know if this is a question, but just, I guess, an upload for everybody in this space is there's a lack of black psychiatrists. There's a lack of black clinical psychologists that can actually properly diagnose. I was misdiagnosed and it cost me 5 years. Cost me 5 years, cost me my weight, cost me, my whole game was being on point, looking pretty. I gained 100 pounds, trusting the process, doing the blackmail, going to ask for help, and it was wrong. It was wrong help, and it cost me 5 years. So I just upload this to prevent anybody from losing 5 years or a year by literally going and get properly diagnosed with proper medication and a proper game plan so that you can go back and flourish and win at life. So thank you guys.
Thank you for that, Carson. I mean, and definitely sorry to hear that. And that, unfortunately, you do hear those occurrences. Being a school social worker, also in inner city, oftentimes children are misdiagnosed as well. So my role and responsibility in the school, I'm always pointing out trauma brain to my teachers because it may mirror ADHD, right? So now we go down this road of ADHD, he needs medication, IEP, which is an individualized education plan. So it goes down this track. There's nothing wrong with that track, but if we take more time to understand the family in the background and knowing that this child is living in a New York City shelter, he, they lost their apartment in a fire, and they don't have any place to stay. They uprooted from their home, all of their bags, and they had to go to this hub called the Path Center in New York City, probably big as this hotel. And there's the places you can stay, there's New York City Department of Education in there, and you have to bring all your belongings with you. So how do you function in school with that going on? So it's important to really get to know and unpack. And part of that is having someone that truly understands that experience. So it's not an ADHD, it's actually real stuff going on in their home where it prevents them from being able to focus in the classroom. And oftentimes, black boys and black men are often misdiagnosed with the wrong diagnosis, unfortunately, in this country.
We can do a better job by enhancing the system of care. I heard in your question you separated the two. And when you look at psychiatric care, there's a monitoring system where you had to meet with that psychiatrist to update signs and symptoms. Well, keeping a journal in a notepad as you go throughout the weeks to identify the symptoms isn't practical for a lot of people. That's why you utilize psychiatric care with counseling. Doing them both give you an opportunity, especially with a release and exchange of information form signed, the psychologist or psychiatrist and the therapist can all collaborate and track your progression along the process so you don't have to waste 5 years. Matter of fact, you don't have to waste 5 weeks because as things are changing, everyone's being updated within that system of care.
I'm going to add to the question. Obviously, in many of our sessions, we have questions. Folks are brief, but I think it becomes important to use the mic as an opportunity to testify because you won't find spaces that are going to give you an opportunity to say what it feels like and to experience it. You may not have a question about mental health, or you may have someone you want to talk to, but I appreciate that moment of testifying.
Yes.
Okay, they made this for taller people. So bear with me. My work-life balance is not great right now, operating off about 4 hours sleep, but there's a massage, some acupuncture waiting for me this weekend. So my question is primarily for Philip, but anyone can kind of chime in. So I started my career accidentally in banking, so Wall Street, hedge funds, on the tech and finance side. But my whole life, I wanted to be in healthcare. So then I left, went to healthcare through a nurse practitioner pathway. Thank you. Through a nurse practitioner pathway. And so I have a doctorate as a nurse practitioner. My focus was on something called social prescribing. So it's really big in the UK, emerging in the US, but it's essentially a model of care where you just don't care about the person's physical and mental health, but you also care about the socioeconomic circumstances they live in. So on the for-profit side, I feel like I'm doing very well. So I kind of combine what I knew from finance and technology kind of with the healthcare, and I have a company called Tax Wealth Doctors. So we do this holistic planning around taxes and finances. Going great. So I guess for that piece of it, my question is, I kind of forgot the way I created like strategic corporate allies when I left that space. And so I kind of want to regain kind of doing that. So if you have any suggestions, but then there's a second part. And so now I'm studying mental health through the nurse practitioner pathway, because once you're a nurse practitioner, you could just add on specialties. And so I would like to do a nonprofit initiative focused on, again, socioeconomic prescribing, but also kind of tailored to addressing like gaps in finances. So again, on the nonprofit side as well, how can I build like strategic corporate, allies?
I think those are good questions, and what I feel we can all learn from is that what we saw with George Floyd specifically is that there was an outpouring from corporate America of wanting to do the right thing in the community, right? And so I feel that if you are intentional about looking into, so for example, at our firm, we have like a Bank of America Foundation, we have a market president's office, that every local city has a team that is focused on getting that type of work, like the nonprofit work or the work with our local businesses to connect with our larger corporate entity, right? So I'd encourage you to be strategic in finding the ways to link to the energy that most of corporate America has around dealing with ESG challenges. The other thing I would ask you to consider as well, this might be like a different conversation, so forgive me, is you'll notice that there is a lot more talk nowadays about sustainable finance and the types of things that people are investing in. And so if you have any connections from your legacy bank days, look into what funds are happening, what's going on in the world around how people are putting money into not just companies, but causes, right? And so that might also give you a connection in regards to how you can think about ways to get access to the groups trying to get access to. The last thing I'll share though is what Mr. Johnson today spoke about, being part of the deal flow. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that a lot of, in my own personal experience, a lot of African Americans, we don't lean into how great of networkers we are. And so once again, many times we go to a place we are the other ones, we are the only ones, but there is power in finding uncommon commonality. And so if I'm being intentional about finding ways to connect with others, I don't just become the black friend, I create a really good, strong, sustainable connection which allows us to have a deeper dialogue with teammates. And so think about that in regards to how you can consider to build your business plan.
Good afternoon. I just have a quick question. Having a team under me at my job, I find myself in a position where I have to be a mentor and an advisor and a therapist, and it affected my personal life because I bring that mentality home. And many times my woman will look at me and be like, "Don't talk, I'm not your employee, I don't work for you." And I'd be like, oh, yeah, you're right. I'm so used to being in that mindset 10 hours a day that when I enter the door, I forget to leave it on the front stairs. So my question to you guys is, since you have this expertise as therapists, how do you turn that off? So when you get home and you're dealing with your significant other, she's not feeling like, I'm not one of your patients, and you're having a difficult conversation. How do you balance those two? Because you may have those thoughts of, oh, I know how to get her to see things my way, but how do you do it without her feeling offended? Like, this is not a therapy session. I need you to come with a different mindset.
So let me start by saying my wife is a therapist also. So, well, we've been together since we were 14, so we know each other pretty much like that. But one thing I'm hearing is that how are you being aware? So it sounds like you're and I'm not your therapist. It sounds like you're just operating and just being robotic. So I think it's important to be more intentional and be more aware and do some mindfulness so that you know that you're transitioning from leaving the office and going home in the car. So when I, leave the office, I physically lock the door and literally like push whatever I received, I literally push it out, and driving home is the intentional time to reset. So it's about really operating in kind of a more aware space. And my homeboy Paul, he's Bache, he's a therapist here too. He has Mondays where Mondays is he don't talk to nobody. He could literally cuts off Mondays where that he has that ability to do so. So if you have an hour to do so, how do you create wellness for you? I feel like it's important that you have your own mantra of this is what I'm going to do. So if it's like you're going to separate a time for your staff, like is it Talk Tuesdays? They only could come to you on Tuesdays with stuff, with questions or things like that, but limit. And then also refer also too, because you need to ensure that you're not consuming and just emptying your cup. So really part of helping them is referring. Sounds like you really need to check out EAP. You know, something like that, really referring them. Sounds like you really got stuff going on. Take tomorrow off and really go find a therapist. Whatever little ways you can encourage them, redirect them, because you don't want to be pouring, and leaving yourself dry that you are affecting your home life. So just be mindful about where you are, what space you're in, and if you're operating out of just mundaneness, you know, and not really aware of where you are. And then second, at work, really start to refer and utilize some of the employee services that they have, because you're not really helping them. You're putting on Band-Aids and just putting out little fires. So do you want to teach them how to fish or just keep giving them fish?
I would say lean into it, and I would say lean into it with vulnerability, and I'll break that down. We sometimes will be so mindful of what everyone else is doing that we forget how what they're doing is influencing us. If you can bring that openness home to your spouse, and just to kind of give an example, I was working with a couple and he was an executive, and in therapy, he was sharing with his spouse how he felt discriminated upon at work, and they'd been married 30 years and she had never known how he felt every day coming home. So the closeness in their marriage was depleting because he had two separate lives. I tell couples, use the nighttime to charge your marriage like you charge that cell phone. Use the nighttime as the opportunity to synchronize all those files, all those hours throughout the day you were apart from your partner, so she knows who you are, because a work life is a big part of who you are. But not the ins and outs, right? Men, we're so cerebral. We want to give you the content. But I ask couples to look at what you're experiencing from the interactions. So give your partner the emotions. Give your partner the feelings. Give your partner the ability to hear the weight, the burden, because we sometimes as men think that our women aren't strong enough to hold it. But they're helpmates. Helpmate doesn't mean weaker. It means you have to be equally, if not stronger. So allow your helpmate to do her part, because she's out there wanting to be there for you, to hold that weight and to share it with you.
As black men have now kind of taken the mantle in terms of black male mental health, for the full panel, where do we go next? Where do black males go next in terms of keep moving the needle and championing this conversation about black male mental health?
A march on Washington. I'm excited about how we're going. I'm, ready to take it to the top. Having more, like, this is a great conversation. I think more conversations like this, I think once we leave, everybody leave here, I would like to impart on everyone, take something that you learned from this conversation and turnkey it to a black man or to someone you know. That's part of leading, that's part of taking the charge, something that everyone can do, right? It's not just a clinician that can do that. It's how we have conversations, how we show empathy to others. How do we, when someone expresses, I'm really feeling down. Oh man, what you were, like, not minimizing someone's experience, right? So because the person like, okay, maybe I won't share no more. You might have lost that person. So being mindful about yourself and being mindful of others. If we all would, just take care of one person, be mindful about what we say. That's how we do it, because we're all dealing and struggling. We're all going through things. So imagine a world where everyone, and I know it sounds corny, but really if everyone was just kind and mindful of other people's and what they're going through, and mindful about the language that we say, how impactful that could be on a global scale, especially for black men.
I would say we continue to do what Black Enterprise is doing today. We put the mental health conversation in more rooms. We put clinicians and trained executives and HR professionals who link employees and employers with mental health services across all sectors. This is a business conference, but we're talking about mental health because Black enterprise and the companies and the sponsors acknowledge the greatest asset are the employees. So if we continue to move these conversations, move clinicians into the rooms across all sectors of business, all sectors of life, we put them in the churches, we put them in the boardrooms, we continue to expand the dialogue and normalize mental health because we understand that your health is your wealth, then we can move forward. And I believe that's the direction we're going in.
I'll just add quickly that completely agree with what both of you shared, but just real quickly, fix ourselves first. That's all I'd ask you to consider. And so be a good example. Our teammate here mentioned that he's a leader, he's a manager. Lead, right? Lead the right way. Create an environment where people are comfortable speaking their thoughts, and take care of yourselves and be the example. And I think that will be very powerful for all of us if we all do that differently.
I wasn't sure if you guys were getting to an ending point just now. But what I was actually thinking about when I was sitting back there is what you kind of led this part of the conversation with. Going into the future, there was always this huge question around DEI. And when you look around the room, Black men themselves represent many different forms of DEI just within that one bucket. And so I wanted to push the question out there to you. How do you deal with that in this new time right now when DEI, and again, being at Bank of America, you're working not just with Black men, obviously you're working with women and every race and gender. How does the world look going forward from a DEI perspective when you think about mental health?
I say personally, I had an awakening this past year with the LGBTQ plus community. I was one to say, oh yeah, I'm not discriminatory. And then I had a clinician I brought on that represents that community. He said, but Chris, you don't represent it anywhere. You don't have any pictures on the website. You don't have it in your material. So for me, it was about being graceful enough to humble myself and pull people in the room and not just think that DEI starts and ends with race.
Yeah, I think we need to have a broader view of diversity and inclusion. And I think we need to lean more into inclusion now, not just focus on diversity. And so I'd encourage us all to think about that as well. In the context of the mental health conversation, what's been interesting is I work for Bank of America, but we're a global company. And so I've had this type of dialogue with friends in Asia, in Europe, in India, and parts of Africa. And what's been interesting is that across the world, there might be a little different flavors, but it's been very similar challenges. Like a lot of people have felt close to feeling burned out. A lot of people have felt, especially coming out of COVID, a lot of stress that's been going on around them. And so no matter where you are, we have to acknowledge that there is a global crisis around people taking care of themselves. And then what I just add to this real briefly, the idea that we know there's different versions of being an African-American male. So I myself am from the islands. One time I had a terrible faux pas where I was working with someone from Africa having this type of conversation, and we had very different experiences because they're from Africa, and I'm African-American. And so even though we had different perspectives, what was interesting is we both had the same experience of walking into a boardroom and being discounted because of how we looked. And so what I think is critical is that even amongst the different flavors of diversity and inclusion, we try to find commonalities so that way we can support each other. And what Mr. Johnson said that I thought was so fantastic in the previous session was, what if we just all came together and helped each other out? I think that's the mission next for us, right? Now, the four of us, what can we do to combine our thoughts and resources, make sure that we are pushing for the message as a team, not as individual voices. And likewise, even though there might be different types of Black men, we all need to support each other to get the message out, how we can support each other.
Yeah. So I would say to answer that question, one of the important factors in our DEI space, or just our minority conversation is that one of the things that the challenges are when we flatten Blackness or we have different shades of whiteness, many times the Black issue was never taken care of. And so there's a portion of resentment in the space because the person that wasn't fed or with civil rights acts that were put in place have not been dealt with. And so when you still have these more broader issues, and everybody will have different mental health issues. The question is, have you still had your reparations moment? Have you still been dealt with in the way that you want to do the first time? Also, just kind of going back as we're kind of closing up right now, one of the obvious things that are probably here is that the mental health charge, obviously Jay Barnett and Jason Wilson's book and the Heal Brother tour that's going around the world, these are different things that are happening, and recognizing that these moments are being moved by 30 and 40-year-old men about mental health conversations. And we saw on the panel yesterday individuals talking about their 70-year-old grandfather is now having conversations about crying and actually feeling those things that he never spoke about. And so that the charge is actually being moved by younger men that in many spaces did not have a voice in growing up, and we're looking for mentors to do this specific thing. And I champion you guys for all the things that you guys are doing. And as we're closing out, please provide your handles and information as we close out right now.
All right.
Books.
Well, thank you, everyone. My Instagram is @the_black_therapist. The _therapist do a lot of conversations around just mental health and wellness for Black men and Black families.
So my website, chrisamatthews.com, lists all my resources. I'm also an author. Finding Your Relationship Fixed, the 4 Reasons Couples Seek Counseling. And that's on Amazon as well.
I'm Philip Palmer. You can find me on LinkedIn. And if I'm being honest, I check my LinkedIn once a month as a part of my own mental health. And so I'm not on social media. I don't intentionally go there frequently because I'm focused on my family and my own personal health. And so if you contact me on LinkedIn, I'll talk to you once a month, but that's where you can find me.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today. I appreciate the panelists, appreciate Black Enterprise, and panelists will be available after that conversation. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alma.